She thought he'd be easy prey, now she's desperate to stay by his side. A single bluish light flickers above the cramped detention chamber, illuminating the glossy sheen of inky restraints that coil around her wrists. The air is thick with the electric hum of security fields. One misstep, and they'll discharge. He stands on the other side of the transparent barrier, arms folded across a chest scarred by countless battles, his stance as controlled as a loaded spring. She watches him with narrowed eyes, noticing how his shoulders roll once, a slow, deliberate motion, as if warming up for a fight. A beat passes, silent but charged, her own pulse thrumming in her ears while she weighs the tension hovering between them. Are you planning on staring all day, or have you finally decided to do something? Her voice slices through the quiet, a low, resonant taunt that vibrates across the small space like a tangible force. She expects him to bristle, maybe spit back a threat or an order, but he remains still, cold eyes unwavering. The subtle tension in his jaw betrays that her words have landed, but he keeps his composure. The door hisses open, and she catches her breath. He's inside now, stepping close enough that the heat radiating off his body is palpable. She is Sirenai, proud huntress of a species known for sensing weakness in a target by reading the fluctuations of body temperature and pulse. It's a trick that's never failed her, until now. Cale Varen, her captor, doesn't seem to register as prey. He's more like a predator who's found her in a cage of her own making. He crosses his arms again, eyes drifting from the restraints at her wrists to the faint bruises on her forearms. She can't tell if he's assessing her health, or just confirming that she's no threat like this. The corners of his mouth tug downward, ever so slightly, and it's enough to set her on edge. She's never seen a human watch her so calmly, as though her presence is just another obstacle to be overcome. Finally, he murmurs, "You talk a big game for someone in chains." His voice is low, that lethal quiet that implies he doesn't need volume to command a room. She's heard rumors of men like him, soldiers turned rogues, bitter souls haunted by betrayal. Yet none of those rumors spoke of the intensity she's seeing in his eyes right now. She shifts her weight on the bench, heat-sensing skin telling her that his body temperature is steady, unwavering. He's not afraid. He's not even anxious. The challenge in her grin widens. "Let me guess, your people think you're here to save the galaxy. You've captured a dangerous alien, so you must be some kind of hero." She nearly spits the word. "Heroes usually die young where I come from." Cale doesn't react to the provocation. Maybe the faint flicker of amusement crosses his face, maybe not, but his voice remains calm. "I'm no hero. If anything, you're more useful alive than dead." He nods at the thick collar around her neck, which is linked to the energy field in the room. The meaning is plain, she's a prisoner, and he has no illusions otherwise. "I need information," he adds simply. "You'll give it, or you'll stay here until you rot." Sirenai bristles, her alien features shifting subtly, the iridescent hue of her skin reflecting her heightened agitation. She can't stand the idea of being pinned down, of being forced into submission. Her species is genetically engineered for the hunt, adept at reading micro-changes in temperature, breath, muscle tension, all to anticipate a target's next move. But Cale is maddeningly controlled. His pulse doesn't spike, his breathing remains measured, and the heat signature around his body doesn't reveal any fear or reckless aggression. He's as steady as an apex predator that knows it has the advantage. She had believed humans would be simpler to break. Clearly, she was wrong. When Cale finally steps back from the bench, she feels an unexpected pang of relief, and maybe disappointment. He's her enemy. A human who stands between her and her freedom, yet there's an undeniable pull in the way he looks at her, measuring her worth like an opponent rather than mere quarry. She refuses to let him see any sign of weakness, even if the constraints around her wrists are starting to bite into her flesh. Instead, she stiffens her spine and lifts her chin in defiance. "So tell me," she growls, "what is it you think I can do for you, soldier boy? Let me guess. I have contacts, secrets, maybe the location of your next big target. And you'll do anything to get it." The slightest tilt of his head suggests she's on the right track, but he doesn't confirm or deny. "We're done here," he says instead, and he turns sharply, heading for the door. The field sizzles back to life as he leaves, humming with lethal energy. She's about to shout something after him, but he's already gone, doors sliding shut in an infuriating whisper. Alone in the cell, Serenai fights the impulse to thrash against her restraints. There's a persistent voice in the back of her mind telling her she might have underestimated him. He's too calm, too controlled, and there's a cold logic in his eyes that warns her he's not easily manipulated. Outside, Cale leans against the corridor wall and closes his eyes for a moment. He remembers the intelligence reports about the captured huntress who supposedly has ties to the warlords that orchestrated countless raids on human settlements. She's rumored to be cunning, lethal, and immune to standard interrogation techniques. Still, he has little choice. There are bigger things at stake than either of them. He rolls his shoulders, that familiar ritual before a confrontation, reminding himself that the real enemy is out there, in the galaxy's dark corners, biding time. Serenai is just a piece on the board, a means to an end. That's what he keeps telling himself, anyway. He heads toward the briefing room, where the dim overhead lights flicker across battered metal walls. A few rebels-turned-resistance fighters lounge around a makeshift table, poring over star charts. They look up as Cale enters, more curious than respectful. He's not their leader, he's an outsider with a vendetta. But his skills and resources have earned him a place among them, for now. One of the rebels, a wiry woman with a data pad fused to her left wrist, nods and says, "The prisoner giving you any trouble?" Cale's response is curt. "She's exactly what I expected." He moves to the table, studying the same star charts. "The question is whether she'll help us find the outposts before the warlords bring reinforcements." A younger fighter chimes in. "Rumor is she's their top huntress. Think we can break her?" He doesn't look up. "That's the plan." But something in his tone betrays a note of uncertainty, or maybe a grim respect. He's not naive about how interrogation works in these parts. Brutality is often the method of choice, but it can backfire with certain species. Serenai might just dig her heels in deeper if they push her the wrong way. He envisions her sitting in that cell, golden eyes full of dark amusement, just daring him to make a mistake. While Cale's mind churns, Serenai's heart pounds against her ribcage. She knows she can't stay passive, not when time is running short and her people could come for her, or worse, abandon her if they think she's compromised. She's a huntress, trained for infiltration and capable of reading her target's every vulnerability. Yet for the first time, she can't get a solid read on her captor. The heat-sensing trick works best when someone's in the grip of strong emotion, but Cale is as steady as an obsidian wall. Beneath that stoic exterior, though, she's detected a flicker of something else, anger, perhaps, or a sense of justice twisted into vengeance. She's compelled to test him again. She stands and paces her cell, ignoring the pinch of the restraints. Her skin's iridescent colors shift as her body temperature fluctuates with her rising adrenaline. She imagines ways to provoke him into mistakes, to get under his skin. Maybe a strategic lie, or a partial truth. Perhaps she can barter with him, offering the location of smaller warlord enclaves in exchange for some form of trust or leniency. It's a game, and one she's confident in playing, if only she could find a crack in his armor. Later, when Cale returns, she meets his eyes with a predatory calm. He steps inside, maintaining a deliberate distance, and for a moment neither speaks. The tension is thick enough to taste. She looks him over, noticing a small burn scar on his forearm that wasn't apparent before, a fresh mark among older wounds. It's not pity she feels, her species doesn't indulge in that, but a grudging recognition that this man has lived through war just as she has. Her lips part, and she breaks the silence again. "Did you miss me, soldier?" He exhales through his nose, just barely a scoff, and moves closer. "Tell me what you know about the warlord Rakai. Where is his base?" She leans back, a cat-like languor in her posture. "Rakai's base is somewhere you humans should never step foot. Why do you want it so badly?" "I'm not interested in explaining myself." There's an edge to his voice this time, and she picks up on the subtle shift in his body temperature. It's slight, but it's there, like a drop of sweat that betrays the body's tension. She pushes, letting her own voice dip an octave lower, playing on that strange resonance her species is known for. You want something from me, but you haven't considered what I might want. Humans can be so short-sighted. He narrows his eyes. Cut the theatrics. You're in no position to negotiate. She rises smoothly, her shackles clinking, and steps toward him until the invisible perimeter set by the security field crackles in warning. She's still caged, but the closeness is enough to let her sense the shift in his pulse, faster than before, though controlled. I am exactly in a position to negotiate, she murmurs, because you need me alive. And I know you won't get what you need by torturing me. That's not who you are, is it? You're not like the rest of them. He stiffens, face impassive. For a moment, a beat of tension passes between them, each daring the other to break first. She can almost taste the conflict in him. She wonders how far she can push before he snaps, or if he'll snap at all. When he spins on his heel to leave, she calls after him, voice wrapping around the cramped cell like a living thing. You can pretend all you want, Cale Varen, but I smell your rage. We're more alike than you know. He hesitates at the door, shoulders tight, but doesn't turn around. The panel slides open, bathing him in a swath of light from the corridor, and then he's gone. The hum of the security field intensifies, sealing her in darkness. Only then does she allow her confident posture to falter. She knows this is only the beginning of a battle of wills, and there's no denying a traitorous spark of anticipation. Cale Varen might be human, but something about him thrums with the same energy she's carried in her veins since birth. She expected him to be easy prey. Now, she's beginning to suspect that entangling with him might be the most dangerous hunt she's ever faced. Outside, Cale endures a flurry of questions from the rebels. He brushes off their concerns with clipped replies. He won't share his strategy. He barely knows it himself. All he knows is that time is running out. The warlord Rakai is amassing the kind of weaponry that could turn entire colonies to ash. Serenai is said to have infiltrated those ranks, to have gained Rakai's trust before going rogue for reasons unknown. If anyone knows how to stop Rakai, it's her. That alone makes her indispensable. But Cale senses a deeper pulse behind her eyes, a drive that mirrors his own. For now, he buries the flicker of curiosity that surfaces whenever she meets his stare. She's a means to an end, and he can't afford to make this personal. Still, the memory of her slow, predatory smile lingers in his mind longer than it should. He wonders, with a flicker of grim amusement, who is really the hunter in that cell, him or her. In the end, does it even matter? He has one goal: destroy Rakai and everyone complicit in the betrayal that left him a wandering soldier with nothing but vengeance in his veins. If he has to outplay Serenai to do that, so be it. Yet in the dim corridors of this hidden base, an unsettling truth settles in. She may be the only one in this galaxy who truly understands the path he's on. And that fleeting sense of kinship, or whatever it is, makes him uneasy in a way he hasn't felt in years. He pushes the thought from his mind, forging ahead with the plan. Tomorrow, interrogation intensifies. Tomorrow, Serenai will have to decide if she's willing to bend or break. Cale's never doubted his ability to push someone to the brink. But as night falls on the makeshift rebel station, he can't shake the feeling that this huntress will make him confront parts of himself he's tried to bury. And in the quiet darkness of her cell, Serenai closes her eyes, already plotting her next move, determined to turn the tables on her captor. Neither of them sleeps easily, each one unknowingly stepping deeper into a dance that might consume them both. The next dawn arrives, bleak and cold, if such terms apply in the artificial environment of a rebel hideout. Cale readies himself with practiced efficiency, checking his weapons, ensuring the security dampeners are calibrated. In the corridor outside Serenai's cell, he hesitates a split second. He can't say why, maybe a soldier's intuition that everything's about to change. Then he enters, and the door seals behind him with a final hiss. A dull rumble shakes the station, rattling lights overhead as tension hangs in the stale air. Cale moves along the corridor, barking quick commands at the scattered rebels. They're under attack, or at least under threat of it. The security sensors picked up a scout ship in the sector, one that might belong to Rakai's forces. If they don't relocate soon, the whole base is jeopardized. And that leaves Kale with one grim option: to move Sirenai off station and hope she cooperates. It's a gamble, but he's got no choice. He storms into her cell, finds her standing by the bench, restraints still in place. "We're leaving," he snaps, ignoring the flicker of triumph in her eyes. She knows something changed. She can sense the urgency in him, the slight rise in body heat, and that new note of adrenaline in his system. She arches an elegant brow, lip curling in a mocking smile. "Oh, I didn't realize we were going on a field trip. Lead the way." He suppresses the urge to snap back, stepping forward to disengage the energy field that keeps her tethered. The static crackle dies, and she rubs her wrists, rolling them in a slow circle. "Don't try anything," he warns, that lethal edge back in his tone. "Who, me?" She flicks her gaze to the door. "I'm an angel in chains, didn't you know?" His hand hovers near his holstered sidearm. For a moment, her gaze lingers on his fingers, as if picturing how quickly he could draw. Her pupils dilate just enough for him to notice. She's assessing him again, and for some twisted reason, that knowledge sends a surge of adrenaline through his veins. A part of him wonders what it would be like to truly face her without these walls, these shackles. But there's no time for that. The station shudders again, accompanied by the distant sound of something mechanical screeching in protest. He seizes Sirenai's arm, not gently, but not as harshly as one might expect, and hauls her into the corridor. Rebels pass them at a sprint, carrying boxes of supplies and weaponry. Alarms begin wailing in the distance. She looks around, smirking. "Quite the panic out here. Let me guess, one of Rakai's scouts found you." He doesn't confirm it, but his silence is enough. Quickly, he leads her to a small hangar bay where a battered shuttle rests, engines whining as a mechanic scrambles to keep it running. The shuttle is hardly state-of-the-art, but it's all they have. Sirenai smells the tension like it's smoke in the air. She can practically taste Kale's determination. They board the shuttle, and she sits in a passenger seat that has a built-in restraining clamp. He locks her in, ignoring the small hiss of annoyance she emits. Then he takes the pilot's seat, flipping switches and pressing ignition codes with practiced haste. The engines roar to life, and a moment later they're lifting off, clearing the station's meager hangar bay force field. She feels the lurch of acceleration and braces herself, wincing slightly as the clamp digs into her side. Kale's voice crackles over the overhead speaker in the cabin. "Strap in." It's a practical command free of malice, yet the undercurrent of tension remains. Sirenai does so, though her wrists remain bound. She can't help noting that he could have left her in a more severe set of restraints for the flight, but he didn't. She wonders if that's a sign of trust or oversight. Either way, she files the detail away for later use. The shuttle careens away from the station, weaving past floating debris and heading for a narrow corridor between asteroids. Sirenai's senses flare. She can almost smell the cosmic dust that drifts past. Her heat-sensitive skin picks up faint anomalies in the atmosphere, but the real interest is on the sensors. She hears the faint ping of detection alarms, enemy or friend, she's not sure. Kale speaks to the co-pilot, a fidgety rebel. "Anything on the scanners?" "Minor blip, might be a scout." "Hard to say," the co-pilot murmurs. "We'll know soon enough if they chase us." Sirenai snorts. "You should assume they will. Rakai doesn't let his prey slip away." At that word, prey, Kale briefly glances over his shoulder, just for a second catching her gaze. There's a moment of shared intensity before he returns to the controls. She doesn't look away. The tension is as thick as the metallic tang of the shuttle's recycled air. The craft dips suddenly, forcing a sharp turn around an asteroid that glows orange from internal geothermal pockets. Gravity dampeners strain, Sirenai's restraints dig in. A hiss of frustration escapes her, and she can't help muttering, "Maybe I'd prefer the station exploding to this pilot." Kale's voice is steady, unamused. "You'll live." She almost laughs at how calm he sounds, as if bulleting through an asteroid field with minimal shields is a typical Tuesday. But there's no fear in his eyes, just relentless focus. That same cool determination she's encountered from the moment she first locked eyes with him in the detention chamber. It's both fascinating and infuriating. She doesn't scare him, she's starting to think nothing does. Their shuttle arcs around the final asteroid and emerges into open space. The sight beyond is bleak, the swirling vortex of a dying star system, ringed by debris. It's the perfect place to lose a tail, but also the perfect place to get lost forever if you don't know your way. Kale steers them into the swirling cosmic dust, and the scanners crackle with static. The co-pilot curses under his breath. "We're blind in here." "Better blind than followed," Kale retorts. Sirenai shifts in her seat, eyes drifting to the faint outline of the pilot's seat. "What's your plan, soldier boy? Fly around until we run out of fuel?" He doesn't answer. Instead, he checks the readouts, adjusting their trajectory. It's only after he's certain they aren't being pursued that he turns his attention to her. His voice slips through the cabin like a blade. "You were Rakai's huntress. I want coordinates for his nearest stronghold." She smiles, slow and dangerous. "And if I say no? You won't." That unwavering certainty in his tone unsettles her. She's used to intimidation, torture, or bribery, but Kale's confidence is something else entirely. It's as though he sees no outcome where he doesn't win. Leaning her head back against the rigid seat, she exhales a soft laugh. "You really think you're the one pulling strings here, don't you?" He meets her gaze through the reflection in the shuttle's console. "I know what I'm doing. You don't. If you had any idea what Rakai is planning..." She catches herself before she reveals too much. She can't quite hide the spark of alarm. Kale's eyes narrow. "Enlighten me." "Not without incentive." She shifts her shoulders, letting the harsh clamp of the seat remind him that she's still a prisoner. "I have no reason to help you. And you, apparently, have no time to force me. So maybe we talk terms." His jaw sets. She's right about the time. They're on the run, and the clock is ticking. He looks back to the co-pilot, who discreetly pretends not to listen, though it's clear every word is being absorbed. Eventually, Kale sighs and flips a switch, muting the overhead speakers so they can't be overheard. Then he swerves the shuttle behind a massive chunk of floating rock, letting it mask their signal for a moment. He turns in his seat, eyes locking with hers. "Fine. Terms. You start talking," he says, "and I'll consider letting you live." Her laugh is genuine this time. "You won't kill me. If you wanted me dead, I'd be floating out there with the rest of the debris." He grits his teeth. "If you don't cooperate, you'll be no use to me. And that means you're a liability." Their eyes clash, the tension between them thickening like a physical presence. She can sense the adrenaline in his system, smell the faint tang of sweat beneath his stoic exterior. She forces her voice to remain steady, that low vibration that creeps under the skin. "Rakai's stronghold isn't just a fortress. It's a central hub of weapon development, things that make your human devices look like children's toys." He waits, expression impassive, but the slight narrowing of his eyes tells her she's got his attention. "Go on," he presses. "He's reverse engineering tech from older civilizations, harnessing energy from dying stars. That's what you're seeing out here. This star system is on the brink, and Rakai's drawing power from its final throes. Imagine a weapon fueled by the collapse of a sun, soldier boy. That's what you're up against." A heavy silence envelopes them. Even the co-pilot looks rattled, glancing at Kale to see if this lines up with any intelligence they've gathered. Kale's mind races. This is bigger than the usual warlord terrorizing border colonies. If Sirenai is telling the truth, Rakai has the potential to annihilate entire star clusters. Kale's voice is dangerously quiet. "Why tell me this now?" She exhales, testing how far she can push. "Because I need you alive long enough to help me stop him." "You need me," he echoes, the faintest trace of a sardonic smile curling his lips. "Funny how that works out." She bristles, but doesn't deny it. "Rakai betrayed me. I've got my own score to settle. You want your revenge or your justice or whatever humans call it, then do it with me. Because I know how to get to him, and you have no idea." Kale's eyes flick to the co-pilot, then back to her. The overhead speaker remains muted, so their conversation stays private. All right. Let's say I believe you. You'll guide us to Rakai's stronghold, and we'll put a stop to whatever he's building. In exchange, what? Her lips part, a soft hiss of breath escaping. She's about to answer when the entire shuttle lurches. Alarms blare. On the console, a red light flashes. The co-pilot yells something about an incoming vessel. Kale curses and slams a switch, pulling the ship into a sharp turn. They're not alone in the star field. Some scouting ship has locked onto them, apparently. Sirenai feels the adrenaline spike in her veins. She barely manages to say, "You were slow." "That's how." Kale ignores her, barking orders at the co-pilot. The shuttle banks hard, evading a burst of plasma fire that streaks through the void. Sirenai's seat restraints bite into her arms, and she stifles a groan. She's never been a passive passenger in a fight, and the claustrophobia of it grates on her instincts. Kale wrestles with the controls, cursing under his breath. They're no match in a direct fight. This old shuttle can't outgun a warlord scout. Their only chance is to hide in the debris field again. The co-pilot attempts to jam the enemy's sensors, and for a brief second, the craft disappears from the screen. Kale shoves the throttle forward, darting behind a massive, rotating slab of cosmic rock. The star's dying glow bathes the ship in hues of red and gold. Still pinned by her restraints, Sirenai breathes heavily, heart pounding in her chest. She can sense Kale's tension across the small cabin, can almost taste the way his body reacts to the threat. Through the tinted viewport, she sees the flicker of the enemy ship's engines as it scans the field. Any second, they might be spotted. She shoots Kale a challenging look. "This is your brilliant escape plan?" He snorts, eyes fixated on the sensors. "Shut up." She almost laughs at the blunt response, but the situation is grim enough that her humor dies on her lips. The scout ship hovers just beyond the edge of the asteroid field. If it decides to launch a wide-beam scan, they're finished. Kale kills the engines, letting the shuttle drift in the shadow of the asteroid. His fingers hover over the controls, jaw tight. No one moves, not even the co-pilot. Seconds crawl by in excruciating slowness. Then the enemy ship peels away, drifting further into the star field, presumably to search elsewhere. The scanner beat fades, replaced by the quiet hum of the shuttle's minimal systems. Kale doesn't speak for a full 10 seconds, ensuring the threat is truly gone. Sirenai feels her breath finally release. The co-pilot claps a hand on the console in relief. Kale powers up the shuttle just enough to maintain a stable orbit behind the asteroid. His shoulders slump, only slightly, but it's enough for her to notice. She sees the sweat at his temples now, the subtle flush on his neck, a physical reaction he can't fully mask. He meets her gaze, and for a moment, the only sound is the drone of the shuttle's systems. She licks her lips, still tasting adrenaline. "Next time," she says, voice low. "Don't fly into the open." He grimaces. "Noted." They regard each other, tension still sizzling. Neither wants to admit that they relied on sheer luck to survive that encounter. The knowledge hangs between them, a silent acknowledgement that they're now entangled in each other's fates. The precariousness of it all, this forced partnership, makes her pulse pound in her ears. She catches the way Kale's chest rises and falls, the faint flush on his skin. In that fleeting instant, she wonders if they're both feeling the first threads of something beyond hostility. But the moment passes when Kale breaks eye contact and activates the overhead speaker again, addressing the co-pilot with a brusque question about engine output. The man stammers a reply, too relieved by their near miss to protest Kale's clipped tone. Sirenai leans back, letting the seat clamp hold her, frustration and curiosity warring in her mind. She's beginning to suspect that the path ahead will be far from straightforward. Kale is no ordinary soldier, and their mutual enemy has just become an even greater threat. She closes her eyes for a moment, her body awash with adrenaline. It's been years since she's felt uncertainty like this, a sense that her well-honed instincts might not be enough. Yet, oddly, it isn't dread that fills her, it's excitement. The hunt has always been her domain. Now, she has an unlikely partner in the chase, a man who stands as her captor and potential ally, with eyes as cold as the vacuum of space. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most dangerous part of all. The next hours pass in a tense calm, the shuttle making slow progress through the star field under Kale's cautious piloting. Serenai dozes fitfully, wrists chafing against her restraints, while Kale and the co-pilot take shifts scanning for pursuers. Eventually, the co-pilot announces they're clear, no sign of the scout. Kale steers them toward a less volatile region of space, a short jump away from the coordinates of a small rebel safe house he once used. Serenai stirs when Kale appears over her, keying in a code to release the clamp around her waist. She rises, rubbing the soreness from her ribs. He gestures with his chin for her to follow. The co-pilot remains in the cockpit, presumably trusting that Kale can handle her alone. Or maybe that's just how strong Kale's reputation is, nobody expects him to fail. She trails him down a narrow corridor, cramped with exposed wiring and cargo netting. They arrive in a tiny compartment that passes for a sleeping berth or break room. He motions her inside, pressing a control to lock the door behind them. It's cramped, the walls nearly brushing their shoulders. The hum of the engines resonates through the metal floor beneath their feet. He points to a metal bench that folds out from the wall. Sit. She folds her arms instead, ignoring the command. Feeling bold and private, are we? He steps closer. She can tell he's trying to intimidate her, but even at this close range, his expression remains infuriatingly calm. We made a deal, he says. You told me about Rakai's weapon, but you haven't given me details on how to get into his fortress. She smirks. We never finalized terms. Then finalize them now. She holds his gaze, letting the moment stretch. Despite the flickering overhead light that bathes them in a harsh glow, she can sense the subtle heat radiating from his body. To her heightened senses, it's like standing next to a banked fire. She wonders if he has any idea how much she can read from him at this range, the tension in his muscles, the faint tightening of his jaw. I want my freedom, she says. No more restraints, no more cells. You treat me as an equal partner. I lead you to Rakai, and we destroy him. He arches a brow. And after that? She hesitates, a lifetime of betrayal and lonely hunts crossing her mind. After that I go my way, you go yours. There's a flicker in his eyes, something that could be relief or disappointment. Fine, he says, voice like flint. But if you cross me, if you so much as think about betraying me, I'll personally see you spaced. She almost laughs at the threat, but there's no humor in his face. He means it. Understood, she purrs. A ripple of tension flows between them again, and for a heartbeat, they stand too close, breathing in the same recycled air. She catches herself wanting to test him, to push him, just to see if he can maintain that iron control. He's the first to break away. He steps back, gesturing for her to sit on the bench. I'll remove those cuffs, but if you try anything. She lifts her shackled wrists. You don't need to finish that sentence. He retrieves a small tool from his belt, leaning in to unlock the restraints. As he does, her senses flare. She can feel the warmth of his breath against her face, smell the unique scent of ozone and sweat that lingers in the creases of his uniform. Her heart rate kicks up a notch, and she wonders if he can sense it. Probably not, but she's certain he can read the shift in her eyes if he's observant. He's so close she could attempt to overpower him, but the co-pilot is right on the other side of the door, and she's not convinced she'd succeed. Not yet. The restraints click open, falling away from her wrists. She rubs the raw skin, looking up at him. Satisfied? He exhales, arms crossing once more. We'll see. She stands, and they're nearly chest to chest. Her skin tingles, anticipating a possible clash. She can sense his body tension, that coil of readiness that never leaves him. She wonders if he's always like this, or if being near her triggers some extra caution. So, she says quietly, next step is finding a place to land so we can start tracking Rakai. He nods. We'll jump to a safe house I know. Gather supplies and intel. Then you lead the way. She tilts her head, the faint flicker of a challenge in her gaze. Brave, trusting me like that. His lips curl in a mirthless half-smile. I wouldn't call it trust. A distant beat from the cockpit interrupts them, and Kale steps away, reaching for the door control. Before he can press it, she stops him with a hand on his arm, light, but enough to make him freeze. She lowers her voice, letting it vibrate that subtle alien resonance. We will destroy Rakai. I promise you that. He meets her gaze, and for a split second, the intensity between them is palpable. Then he nods. Good. She releases him, and he unlocks the door. They emerge into the corridor, returning to the cockpit in tense silence. The co-pilot eyes them warily, but says nothing. Kale takes the pilot's seat once more, firing up the engines for a short jump to safer territory. Sirenai settles in the co-pilot's seat now, no longer shackled. She stretches her arms, feeling a rush of liberation, a coil of excitement churning in her gut. Despite herself, she can't help a dark, satisfied smile. He's hard to read, but she's beginning to enjoy the challenge. There's something raw and undeniably compelling about Kale Varen. The thought that she initially pegged him as easy prey now feels laughable. He might be the only human who can stand in the ring with her. As the shuttle aligns with its jump coordinates, she casts a final glance at him from the corner of her eye. He remains stoic, scanning the NAV display, but she doesn't miss the tension in his posture. He's every bit as on edge as she is. For now, they're forced allies, two predators circling the same quarry. But somewhere deep in her gut, a new certainty has taken root. She might not like how he got her here, but she's not eager to step away from his side. The engines roar, and space outside warps into a swirl of stars. They leap to faster-than-light speeds, leaving the dying star system behind. Their next destination, a safe house and the beginnings of a plan to take down one of the galaxy's most dangerous warlords. And as the stars blur into lines, both Kale and Sirenai sense that this fragile, volatile alliance is only going to heat up from here. Chaos erupts the moment they drop out of faster-than-light travel. The safe house is hidden on a barren moon orbiting a gas giant, but the place looks abandoned. Darkened bunkers and silent watchtowers greet them. Kale lands the shuttle on a worn pad that creaks under the ship's weight. A thin atmosphere swirls outside, tinted green by the planet's glow. Sirenai follows him down the ramp, co-pilot in tow. She notes the swirling dust devils that gust around them, fueled by the moon's erratic climate controls. There's no sign of life, at least not immediately. Kale sets a brisk pace toward a reinforced hatch at the base of a dome structure. She sees him roll his shoulders before he grips the hatch wheel, that subtle ritual he always does before any fight. They enter, weapons drawn. The interior is dim, emergency lights casting flickering shadows on corrugated metal walls. Sirenai's enhanced senses pick up faint heat signatures, possibly residual from machinery that's recently been shut off. She glances at Kale, who moves ahead with lethal grace. The co-pilot lingers behind, scanning corners with shaky aim. Without warning, a figure jumps from behind a crate, brandishing a makeshift club. Kale ducks, slams an elbow into the assailant's midsection, and sends them sprawling. It's a rebel fighter, one of Kale's old associates, perhaps. He's gaunt and wild-eyed, clearly terrified. Recognizing Kale, he stammers apologies, explaining that they were attacked by Rakai's scouts a week ago. The survivors fled, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. Kale curses under his breath, helping the man to his feet. They learn that resources are scarce, power failing, and the outpost is nearly defenseless. Rakai's forces left to regroup, but they could return any time. Sirenai listens with a detached calm, scanning the gloom for more threats. It's clear that nowhere in this sector is safe for long. As they secure what little supplies remain, an argument brews between Kale and the co-pilot. The co-pilot wants to abandon this entire region and head for a stronger rebel base. Kale insists they need any intel stored here, maybe something that pinpoints Rakai's next move. Sirenai speaks up, reminding them that time is short. The tension crackles as they square off in the center of the musty dome, voices echoing off metal walls. But to Kale's surprise, Sirenai moves to his side, albeit with a calculating glint in her eyes. She's not doing it out of camaraderie. She wants to keep him close because he's her best shot at revenge against Rakai. The idea of losing that chance now makes her chest tighten with a sharp pang of desperation she quickly buries. Even so, there's a strange note of unity in how they stand together, as if their arguments are for show, and the real conflict is with everyone else. She wonders if he feels it too. Eventually, the co-pilot relents, scowling. Kale splits them into small teams, some to scavenge for data, others to secure the perimeter. Sirenai stays with Kale, systematically scouring the outposts for anything that might hint at Rakai's location. While rummaging through a back room stacked with battered equipment, she can't resist teasing him in a low voice that only he can hear. "You lead well. I almost believed you care about these people." He throws her a cold look. "I care about the mission. Everything else is secondary." She steps closer, that subtle, predator's grace evident in every movement. "And if the mission demanded you leave them to die, you'd do it?" His expression hardens, but he doesn't answer. That silence is enough of an answer, though. She respects it in a grim way. This is a man who's seen too much to let sentimentality rule him. And yet there's a flash in his eyes when she draws too near, a heat she senses before his pulse can betray it. She wonders if that small flicker of something is enough to unravel him eventually. They find an old console in a locked storage chamber. Kale powers it up, rummaging for spare parts to jury-rig a connection. Sirenai watches quietly, impressed at his technical skill. He's not just muscle, it seems, he's cunning enough to bypass outdated encryption protocols. She stands guard at the door, scanning the corridor. Her skin prickles at the emptiness, as if expecting an ambush any moment. At last, Kale extracts a data chip from the console. His eyes flick over the text scrolling across the old monitor. "Coordinates," he mutters, "for something called Project Eclipse." She stiffens. "That's it. Eclipse is Rakai's code name for the Starkiller weapon. If these numbers are right." She leans over his shoulder, studying the data. The moment she's that close, she feels his presence acutely. His shoulder brushes hers. The tension coiled in him is nearly tangible. She tears her gaze away, focusing on the readout. "We have a location." Kale allows himself a brief nod of satisfaction. "So it's real, then. The star collapsing tech. We have to destroy it." She meets his gaze, her own eyes gleaming with a fierce promise. Together. A crackle of electricity buzzes through the outpost's power lines, lights flickering. A distant explosion shakes the floor beneath their feet. Kale curses, gripping the data chip. The co-pilot's voice crackles through a half-broken comm unit. "We've got inbound. Multiple hostiles. We need backup." Sirenai's heart leaps. She and Kale move in unison, sprinting through twisting corridors back toward the central dome. The rebel who initially attacked them stands guard at a half-open blast door, sweat beading on his brow. He shouts something about Rakai's scouts. The same ship that nearly caught them before must have radioed for reinforcements. She throws Kale a wry look, adrenaline pulsing. "I guess we finish this conversation later." Without waiting for an answer, she snatches a discarded sidearm from the floor. He doesn't object. She's proven she wants Rakai gone as much as he does. They press themselves against the door's edge, peering outside. A squad of 5 heavily armed troopers in dark armor is advancing, scanning for heat signatures. She catches the swirl of dust around them, the faint shimmer of force shields. Kale's jaw sets. "We make a break for the shuttle. And let them corner us in there?" She eyes him skeptically. "Better to pick them off or distract them." He shoots her a glare. "We're outnumbered." Her lips twist into a grim smile. "So we do something unexpected." She steps into the open before he can stop her. A volley of blaster fire erupts, scorching the ground. She ducks behind a rusted hoverlift, returning fire with precise bursts. Kale curses and swings out to provide cover, dropping 2 troopers with deadly aim. The co-pilot and the remaining rebels join in, though they're scattered and disorganized. Dust fills the air, and in the chaos, Sirenai's heart pounds with an exhilarating rush. This is her element, chaotic battle, the stakes life or death. She catches the flicker of motion on her left and snaps off a shot, winging a trooper's shoulder. Another tries to flank her, but Kale intercepts, rolling behind a crate and taking the enemy down in a single, brutal takedown. Adrenaline surges, a savage thrill coursing through her veins. She and Kale move with uncanny coordination, as if they've done this 100 times before. She wonders if he feels it, the synergy of two warriors who trust the other to handle their flank. It's heady, almost dizzying. She's so used to operating alone, but fighting side by side with him is an entirely different high. The outpost rumbles with more blasts, the structure above them groans ominously. They have to move. Kale signals to the co-pilot, indicating they should retreat to the shuttle. Serenai nods, covering their advance with a series of precise shots that force the remaining troopers to duck for cover. Blood pounds in her ears as she and Kale sprint back inside. They reach the shuttle's ramp at a dead run. One last trooper barrels into view, training a plasma rifle on Kale. Serenai doesn't hesitate. She lunges forward, hooking the trooper's arm and wrenching it aside. The shot goes wild, melting a hole in the hull. Kale whips around, driving the butt of his weapon into the trooper's helmet with a sickening crunch. Silence falls, punctuated only by the rasp of their breathing. The trooper collapses, and Serenai stands chest to chest with Kale in the swirl of dust, adrenaline surging. She can feel his body heat, his heart pounding as hard as hers. For a split second, their eyes lock, and she registers a flash of something primal in his gaze, a reflection of her own battle-hungry exhilaration. Then the co-pilot is yelling for them to hurry, and the moment shatters. They clamber aboard, sealing the hatch behind them. The engines roar, lifting the shuttle off the moon's surface with a violent shudder. Serenai presses a hand to the hull's inner wall, steadying herself. Her mind races. They have the data now, coordinates for Project Eclipse. But they also have the full wrath of Rakai's forces on their tail. There's no turning back. Kale sets the autopilot to exit the moon's gravity well, then glances at Serenai. Neither speaks, but the intensity between them is palpable, a shared acknowledgement that they've just crossed a threshold. They're in this together, for better or worse. The raw adrenaline, the closeness of combat, it all lingers in the air. She tears her gaze away first, forcing a laugh that sounds too loud in the cramped cabin. Seems we work well together when bullets are flying. He exhales, nodding once, still keyed up from the fight. We'll need that if we're going to take on Rakai. His voice is steady, but she catches a tremor in his shoulders, a subtle sign of the rush still coursing through him. Her own pulse continues to thunder, her breath ragged. She knows the signs of a body on the edge. This is how her species thrives, riding the razor-thin line of survival. But it's been a long time since she's experienced it with a partner. They emerge from the moon's atmosphere, the battered shuttle streaking into open space. Outside, a swirl of starlight greets them. The co-pilot curses about hull damage, but they're still flying, for now. Kale hands the data chip to the co-pilot, instructing him to decrypt more details. Then, for a moment, he and Serenai just stand there, facing each other in the dim light of the cabin. Her throat feels dry, but she musters a cocky grin. So much for an easy extraction. He snorts, though there's a ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. You were expecting easy? She shakes her head. Easy would be boring. A pause stretches, laden with unspoken tension. She swallows, her heart still pounding from the battle. She can almost sense his pulse slowing to match hers, a strange syncopation that makes her skin prickle. For a split second, she wonders what it would feel like to press closer, to test him in a different way, one not dominated by gunfire and flying fists. Kale nods toward the cockpit. We should get moving before reinforcements show up. She exhales, letting the moment slip away. Agreed. And so they step forward, side by side, forging deeper into their partnership of necessity. Neither of them knows if they'll survive the coming storm. But as Serenai glances at Kale, she feels a stirring of something she can't quite name, something that feels like both danger and a promise. The next hours bring more tension, but of a quieter kind. The co-pilot focuses on decrypting the data chip, and Kale keeps the shuttle cruising just outside major traffic lanes to avoid detection. Serenai takes the opportunity to rest, or tries to, in one of the cramped sleeping berths. Sleep doesn't come easily. Every nerve is still alive with adrenaline, every breath reminding her of the close call on the moon. Finally, she gives up and wanders back to the cockpit. Kale is there, alone now. The co-pilot must be in the back, tinkering with the data. Kale doesn't look over when she appears. He knows she's there by the soft hiss of the door. She stands beside him, arms crossed, eyes on the swirling cosmos. After a moment, she says, "You're too quiet." He adjusts the throttle, replying in a murmur. "Not much to say." She arches a brow, noticing the set of his jaw. "So, you don't want to talk about the fact we nearly got ourselves killed back there?" He huffs a short, humorless laugh. "Not particularly." She rolls her eyes. "Suit yourself?" But her curiosity lingers. "You've done this before, haven't you? Led small teams, improvised escapes. It's second nature to you." He glances at her, features unreadable. "I was special forces before I went rogue." She hums softly. "And your old faction betrayed you?" He tenses, and she senses his pulse spike. "They left me for dead after a botched op. I survived, they didn't." A ghost of a smile touches her lips, though there's no real humor in it. "That sounds familiar. Rakai betrayed me too, though I'm sure your story is a bit more honorable." He doesn't ask for details. Perhaps he thinks it's none of his business, or perhaps he doesn't want to compare scars. A comfortable silence settles, and for a moment, it feels oddly peaceful in the cockpit. The hum of the engines, the star-streaked view, the presence of two predators who've lost too much to dwell on regrets. She shifts her weight, leaning a hip against the console. "Once we find Rakai's stronghold, how do you plan on destroying a weapon that harnesses the power of a dying star?" He exhales, scanning a readout. "Haven't gotten that far yet." A laugh escapes her, soft and genuine. "At least you're honest." Their eyes meet. There's an undercurrent between them, a thrumming tension that hasn't dissipated since the moment they first locked gazes in her cell. They both sense it, but neither addresses it. Instead, Kale looks away, focus returning to the controls. Serenai lingers a moment longer, then pushes off the console, stepping away. She murmurs, "Wake me if the co-pilot makes any progress. Or if you need another pair of eyes out here." He grunts in acknowledgement, and she leaves, heading back to the sleeping berth. This time, her mind is calmer, having engaged in something like conversation with him. She wonders if, beneath his hardened exterior, he's just as torn as she is by the pull they both pretend isn't there. Before she can puzzle it out, exhaustion claims her, and she drifts into uneasy dreams of cosmic battles and an unrelenting shadow shaped like Rakai's grin. In the cockpit, Kale remains at the helm, shoulders rigid. She might be gone, but her presence lingers like heat on his skin. He exhales, forcing himself to focus on the star map. There's no room in this war for personal entanglements, he tells himself. But as the shuttle glides through the void, he can't quite banish the memory of how they fought together, how her eyes sparkled with dangerous delight in the thick of battle. He shakes his head and stares into the endless expanse of stars. Tomorrow, they'll face their enemy. Tomorrow, the mission continues. If he's learned anything from a lifetime of conflict, it's that nothing is guaranteed, and bonds forged in chaos can be the hardest to break. They drop out of faster-than-light travel near a rust-colored planet marred by swirling storms. The co-pilot beckons them to the shuttle's navigation console, pointing to a set of coordinates extracted from the data chip. According to the battered star map on the screen, Rakai's base is hidden on a planetoid at the edge of this system, a region plagued by cosmic anomalies and stellar debris. Even the largest trade vessels avoid it. Kale stands with arms folded, brow furrowed as he studies the route. The co-pilot drones on about gravitational distortions and radiation pockets that might fry their sensors. Serenai silently observes, leaning against the bulkhead. She can almost taste Kale's tension, like ozone before a storm. This is it, where they'll confront Rakai's operation. The thought fills her with equal parts determination and trepidation. After all, she knows better than anyone what the warlord is capable of. Scans won't be reliable, the co-pilot says. We'll have to do most of this blind. Kale nods grimly. We'll make it work. Sirenai steps forward, her voice low and resonant. I know a route through the debris fields. You'll need my eyes on the nav. My species can sense certain electromagnetic shifts, especially when star cores are involved. The co-pilot looks skeptical, but Kale gives a curt nod. Do it. She moves to the console, her presence commanding in the cramped cockpit. The co-pilot hesitates, then relinquishes the station. She taps a few keys, pulling up star charts and adjusting for anomalies. Kale watches her, arms still crossed, face unreadable but mind clearly working overtime. She can sense the subtle heat rolling off him, the tension in his stance. She wonders if he's nervous about trusting her with critical navigation or if it's something else. Her alien physiology keys her into the nuance of body heat, and Kale's is slightly elevated, like a man on alert, ready for a fight or something else. She licks her lips, focusing on the star chart instead of the faint flush she detects in his cheeks. They have bigger problems than her unwise fascination with a human soldier who can match her blow for blow. She finishes plotting a tentative course, stepping back. We'll have to adjust every few minutes. Space is unstable near that planetoid. She glances at Kale. We do it right, we slip in unnoticed. We do it wrong, we burn up in a cosmic swirl. He nods, completely serious. Then we do it right. She almost smiles at his single-minded resolve. Fine. Let's go. They settle into their positions. Kale in the pilot's seat, Sirenai at the co-pilot console, guiding him through real-time adjustments. The other rebel, the man who tried to attack Kale earlier, hovers anxiously in the background, while the co-pilot triple-checks systems. The tension is palpable as the shuttle slips toward the planet's orbit and then past it, heading into deeper, more treacherous space. Outside the viewports, the stars distort, swirling like liquid light caught in eddies of cosmic gravity. The sensors beep warnings every few seconds: radiation spikes, gravitational pockets, debris clusters. Sirenai's eyes flick over readouts while her heat-sensing skin picks up on subtle electromagnetic shifts. She barks a quick command for Kale to adjust course 2 degrees starboard. He obeys without question. They dodge a drifting mass of metallic shards that might have once been a warship. It tumbles past like a broken tomb, silent and foreboding. Sirenai can't help thinking it's a fitting graveyard for those who tried to face Rakai unprepared. She glances at Kale, noticing the tightness in his jaw as he weaves through the wreckage with near-superhuman reflexes. His concentration is absolute, shoulders rolling every now and then to keep himself limber. She taps a control, adjusting for the next anomaly. There, see that subspace distortion? We need to skirt its edge or we'll tear the hull apart. He shifts the shuttle's angle just enough. A wave of dizzying force rattles the bulkheads, but they pass through unscathed. The co-pilot exhales loudly. We can't keep this up. The engine core's overheating. Kale glances at Sirenai. She nods, quickly scanning the readouts. There's an eddy pocket ahead. If we drop into it, we can ride the current for a few minutes, let the engine cool. He makes the adjustments, guiding the shuttle into a swirling patch of space that glows faintly purple. The ship jolts, then settles into a gentle drift, coasting along the cosmic current. The engine temperature stabilizes, though the sensors remain half-fried by radiation. Kale takes his hands off the controls, flexing his fingers. She can't help noticing the tension leaving his body in small increments. He turns to her quietly. Nice work. She nods, not quite meeting his eyes. I told you I know these anomalies. There's a pause. Something in the cockpit air shifts. Maybe it's the relative calm after a harrowing bit of navigation, or maybe it's the hum of the engine slowing to a purr that makes everything feel too intimate. The co-pilot fiddles with the console, giving them an inadvertent moment alone. Kale leans closer, his voice low enough that only she can hear. You sure you want to do this? There's no going back once we engage Rakai on his turf. She meets his gaze, gold eyes reflecting the starlight. I've never been more sure. He owes me blood, and I intend to collect. His face is unreadable, but she notices a flicker of something akin to approval. Then he turns away, addressing the co-pilot about power distribution. She remains where she is, heart beating a little faster than usual, a sensation she refuses to analyze too deeply. Their drift through the pocket continues for several minutes, giving the ship time to recover from the cosmic battering. Then the sensors beep again. Sirenai sits up, scanning the readouts. We're close. Another half hour, and we'll have to drop out of the current. The co-pilot's hands dance over the console. And then we're on approach to the planetoid. Kale nods, gaze fixed forward. That's where we'll find Project Eclipse. Tension returns to the cabin like a living entity, pressing on them from all sides. The calm respite is over. Time to face the real danger. Sirenai unbuckles her seat harness, glancing at Kale. I'll check the gear. He doesn't question it. She steps out, heading back to the main hold where weapons and supplies are stored. The small corridor feels even narrower now, as if her heightened awareness of the situation makes everything close in. The hum of the engines pulses beneath her feet. In the hold, she rifles through what they salvaged, a few rifles, some explosives, ration packs. Pitiful, all things considered. They're about to go up against a warlord armed with star-killing technology, and they've got a handful of blasters and a single battered shuttle. Madness. But Sirenai has lived her whole life on the edge of impossible odds, and she's still here. Her mind drifts to Kale. She doesn't want to admit how much she respects him already, how drawn she is to that lethal calm. There's power in him, a quiet wrath that mirrors her own thirst for vengeance. She shoves the thoughts aside and focuses on loading a fresh energy pack into her sidearm. The door hisses open, and she turns to see Kale enter, also checking gear. He's methodical, hooking grenades to a belt harness and verifying each readout. They work in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the click of ammo canisters and the shuffle of footsteps. Finally, he says, "We'll need a plan once we're inside. You know his layouts." She nods, reattaching a pistol to her thigh holster. Rackai's bases vary, but he likes to build labyrinths, layered defense grids, automated turrets, and a central chamber for whatever big project he's working on. I'd wager he's got a shielded facility at the core of the planetoid, with a runway or a docking bay for supply ships. Kale considers this, frowning. We can't take a direct approach. We'll need infiltration. Maybe sabotage from within. She bites her lip. I can help navigate the interior, but I'll need you covering me. Rackai's men won't hesitate to shoot on sight, especially me. He glances up, eyes flicking to her face. There's a subtle tension in his jaw as he says, "Then we stick together. No heroics." She smirks. "You say that like you expect me to run off." His expression remains serious. "I can't afford you getting yourself killed." Her heart does a small, unexpected flip at the blunt statement, though she quickly reminds herself that he needs her as a guide. That's all. Still, the words linger in the space between them, charged with an undercurrent they both feel but don't address. She turns back to the supplies, double-checking an ammo count. They finish gearing up, each lost in their own thoughts. When they return to the cockpit, the co-pilot reports that they're ready to leave the eddy pocket. Kale and Sirenai exchange a final look, a shared resolve passing between them. Then she reclaims the co-pilot's seat, guiding him out of the swirling cosmic current and toward the planetoid that looms ahead like a sullen, cratered beast. The approach is harrowing. The gravitational distortions intensify, dragging at the shuttle. Patches of lethal radiation bloom on the sensors. Even Sirenai's innate sense is overwhelmed by the chaotic signals. She grits her teeth, calling out minute course corrections. Kale's knuckles turn white on the controls, but he never wavers, deftly maneuvering around each threat. When they finally breach the planetoid's upper atmosphere, or what passes for one, everyone exhales a collective sigh of relief. The terrain below is a jagged expanse of canyons and volcanic vents, bathed in faint, toxic light. Sirenai scans for a hidden landing zone that might give them cover. She spots a crevice that leads into a network of tunnels, possibly large enough for their shuttle. Take us there, she instructs, pointing at the redoubt. We can hide the ship inside. Kale aims the vessel toward the rocky outcropping, skillfully guiding it through swirling ash clouds. The co-pilot mutters curses at the turbulence, but soon enough they're gliding into the mouth of a cavern. The shuttle's landing struts extend, scraping against uneven stone. With a final, jarring thud, they come to rest in near darkness. Everyone unbuckles, tension coiled in every muscle. Kale grabs the data chip, holstering his weapons. Cyrenite tugs on a lightweight breathing apparatus. There's no telling what toxins fill these caverns. The rest of the small crew does the same. Then the ramp lowers with a hiss, revealing a dank, eerie passageway lit only by the shuttle's exterior lights. Cyrenite leads the way, sidearm ready. Her heat-sensing skin detects pockets of warmer air from geothermal vents, but no immediate signs of life. Kale follows close, scanning the gloom, while the co-pilot and the other rebel bring up the rear. It's unsettlingly quiet, just the drip of mineral-rich water and the distant rumble of volcanic activity. She halts at a bend in the tunnel, hand raised for silence. Her senses catch a faint hum, mechanical, likely a power conduit. That means Rackai's base is near, probably just beyond these caverns. She glances at Kale, whose eyes narrow. He motions for her to move forward, and she does, heart pounding. They emerge into a vast subterranean chamber, the walls lined with alien scaffolding and cables that pulse with a sickly glow. At the center lies a massive freight elevator platform, presumably descending deeper into the planetoid. Cyrenai's pulse spikes. This is it, the entrance to Rackai's fortress. She remembers enough from her time serving him to know that once they're on that elevator, there's no turning back. Armed sentries, automated defenses, and the Starkiller prototype all wait below. She hears Kale's breath hitch, just barely. The vastness of the chamber, the ominous energy in the cables, it's enough to make anyone hesitate. But he doesn't. He glances at Cyrenai, silent understanding passing between them. This is what they came for. With a hand signal, he instructs the co-pilot and the other rebel to stay back, guard the shuttle, and be ready for a quick extraction. They're outnumbered, so a smaller infiltration team stands a better chance. Cyrenai steps onto the freight elevator with Kale, both weapons drawn. The platform shudders to life under their combined weight. As it descends into darkness, she spares him one last glance, reading the tension in his stance. His face is set in grim determination. She can almost feel the adrenaline humming through him, mirroring her own. They're heading straight into the lion's den, but somehow, standing beside him, she feels a spark of confidence. Not in victory exactly, but in the certainty that he won't break under pressure. And maybe that's enough to tip the scales in their favor. The elevator grinds lower, and the glow from the cables intensifies, casting flickering patterns on their faces. Neither speaks. Words aren't necessary. Their mutual goal is clear, and so is the searing undercurrent of tension that's been building from the moment they first locked eyes. The air grows hotter, rancid with the smell of burning minerals. She readies her pistol, Kale checks his rifle. A final jolt, and the elevator lurches to a stop. The doors slide open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing the labyrinth beyond, a series of corridors illuminated by flickering overhead strips. A wave of heat and metallic tang assaults them. Far ahead, alarms blink quietly in red, indicating restricted zones. Rackai's lair. Cyrenai squares her shoulders, feeling Kale's presence at her back. For an instant, she's gripped by a fierce, reckless surge of gratitude that he's here. She expected him to be easy prey once, but now she's never felt so glad to have someone so dangerous by her side. Silently, they step into the corridor, plunging deeper into the heart of the beast, side by side, every sense alert. The final confrontation looms, and though fear gnaws at the edges of her mind, the slow burn of something else, something close to desire, propels her forward, fueling every step toward the darkness ahead. They move in near silence, boots scraping against metal grates. The corridor twists, branching into multiple passages. Cyrenai halts at each junction, scanning for signs of guards or automated turrets. Her heart thrums in her ears, and she can sense Kale's tension behind her. The place is eerily underguarded, which only heightens her unease. Rakai is too cunning to leave his stronghold unprotected. They take a left turn, following the faint hum of power conduits. The air grows thicker, hotter. At last, they come upon a heavily reinforced door, flanked by a pair of automated sentry guns. Sirenai motions Kale to wait, crouching behind a row of storage crates. She observes the guns' movement, noting their scanning arcs. An alarm console blinks near the door. She leans close to Kale, voice barely above a whisper. "We can't destroy the guns outright. That'll trigger the alarm. We need to disable them." He nods, gaze flicking to the console. "Manual override?" "Likely," she breathes. "But we have to get to it without getting shredded." He studies the pattern of the sentries, then glances at her. "Cover me. I'll handle the console." Before she can protest, he's already moving, rolling from cover to a small gap in the sentry's scanning arcs. She grips her pistol, heart pounding, and fires a precise shot at a sensor on the left gun just as it starts to pivot toward Kale. Sparks fly, the gun stuttering. Kale reaches the console, pressing himself flat against the wall as the second gun swivels, searching for a target. She breaks cover, sprinting to a different vantage point, letting off another shot that distracts the second sentry. Kale's fingers dance over the console, bypassing the security protocols. She holds her breath, bracing for the shriek of an alarm, but only a dull clunk echoes as the sentry guns go limp, power cut from their servo motors. Kale nods to her, wiping sweat from his brow. She exhales relief, motioning him to join her by the door. In the hush that follows, they exchange a brief look, the adrenaline forging a sharper awareness of each other's breathing, each other's presence. She can feel the wild hammering of her pulse. A momentary flush warms her cheeks. Kale's eyes linger on her for a split second longer than necessary, and she senses something in his gaze, a flicker of gratitude, or perhaps reluctant admiration. Neither speaks. They move on. The door opens to a large laboratory-like chamber. Machinery thrums, lights blink and arcs across a massive cylindrical device at the chamber's center, connected to thick cables that snake into the walls. The ambient temperature is scorching, and the air crackles with suppressed energy. Sirenai's chest tightens as she recognizes the prototype Starkiller at the device's heart, a miniaturized singularity engine that can harness the death throes of a star. The scale of it is terrifying, even incomplete. Kale's expression darkens. "So it's real." She nods grimly. "This is Project Eclipse." A voice echoes from a raised platform at the far end of the chamber, cold and triumphant. "And you've walked right into it, my dear huntress." Sirenai's blood runs cold. She'd recognize that voice anywhere. Tall, imposing, dressed in black combat gear with intricate metallic plating that glimmers under the harsh lights, Rakai. His grin is all jagged edges, and a handful of heavily armed guards flank him. He descends a set of stairs, each step measured, menacing. "It took you long enough to return. I was starting to think you died, Sirenai." His gaze shifts to Kale, and a flicker of amusement crosses his features. "And you've brought a friend. How sweet." Kale lifts his rifle, aiming without hesitation. "Shut up." Rakai chuckles, raising a hand in a mock surrender. "You must be the human causing so much trouble. I'd been told you were formidable." His tone is almost playful, which sets Sirenai's nerves on edge. "Now do you think you can stop me with that little popgun?" She snarls, stepping forward, weapon trained on him. "I'm here for your head, Rakai. That device behind you is an abomination." He spreads his hands, stepping aside slightly to give them a better view of the Starkiller. "Abomination? It's art, my dear. The final solution to a galaxy that refuses to kneel. With it, entire star systems will crumble at my whim." Her grip tightens on her pistol, rage coiling in her gut. She expected to feel fear, but all she feels is hatred and a savage need for vengeance. "You betrayed me. Left me to die." "Betrayed you?" Rakai smirks. "You were a weapon, Sirenai, a means to an end." I used you, and you outlived your usefulness. He tilts his head, eyes narrowing. Yet here you are, proving your worth again by delivering yourself, a rogue human operative, right to my doorstep. Kale's voice, low and lethal. You talk too much. In a burst of motion, he fires. The guards scramble. Rack-Eye ducks behind a console. Energy blasts scorch the air, sparks flying from the Starkiller apparatus. Serenai dives behind a metal column, returning fire at the guards who tried to flank them. Adrenaline floods her system, and she's dimly aware of Kale moving with fluid precision, taking down 2 guards in quick succession. But there are more. Rack-Eye always has more. Rack-Eye reappears on the platform, shouting orders. Automated turrets emerge from the ceiling, their muzzles glowing ominously. Serenai swears under her breath, rolling behind a row of consoles for cover. She can feel the heat of near misses searing the air around her. Kale vaults over a railing, landing beside her. This is bad, he growls, reloading his rifle. She nods, panting. We have to destroy the device. That's all that matters. He glances at the Starkiller. We set charges. Bring the whole chamber down. The plan is as reckless as it is straightforward. She grimaces, rummaging in a pouch at her belt for the small explosive charges they salvaged. Cover me. He bursts from cover, drawing turret fire, while she dashes to the base of the Starkiller. The device hums with terrifying power, the metal almost vibrating under her touch. She plants the charges in key spots, arms trembling from tension. Kale continues to keep the guards busy, bullets and plasma bolts ricocheting off metal surfaces. Rack-Eye shouts something unintelligible, furious. A blast of energy slams into the console near Serenai, sending her sprawling. Her ears ring. Coughing, she pushes herself up, half blinded by the smoke. Her eyes flick around, searching for Kale. She spots him pinned behind a half-melted chunk of metal, exchanging fire with 3 of Rack-Eye's elite troopers. Her heart tightens. She can't lose him here, not when they've come this far. Summoning every ounce of will, she scrambles to her feet, ignoring the stinging burn on her arm from the blast. She aims her pistol at the troopers pinning Kale down. A volley of shots echoes through the chamber. 2 troopers drop, but the third manages to shoot back, grazing her side with a sizzling beam. She gasps in pain, staggering, but keeps firing until he falls. Kale sees his opening and rushes to her side, supporting her with an arm around her waist. You okay? She winces, nodding even though the burn sears her flesh. Planting charges, almost done. She shoves another small explosive under a conduit, setting the timer. Meanwhile, Rack-Eye's laughter echoes from somewhere above, maddening and cold. You think you can blow up my masterpiece? He crows. You'll only kill yourselves in the process. Kale growls, pulling Serenai away. We're out of time. They dash behind the main console, breathing hard, hearts pounding. She sets the final detonator, a remote in her shaking hand. Kale's gaze darts to the Starkiller. How long do we have? She coughs, tasting blood. It'll blow in about 90 seconds once I trigger it. That's our window to get the hell out. His eyes flicker. That might not be enough. She meets his gaze. Better than letting him complete it. A harsh laugh slices through the smoke. Rack-Eye steps forward, a personal shield shimmering around him. How noble! Dying for a cause that will fade like dust. He raises a sleek energy weapon, pointing it at Kale. You, human, were a thorn in my side. I should thank you for delivering her back to me. Kale's finger twitches near the trigger. I owe you for a lot of dead friends. Rack-Eye smirks, muzzle flashing. A beam lances out. Kale tries to dodge, but the shot clips his shoulder, sending him crashing into the console. Serenai screams, lunging forward. She fires at Rack-Eye's shield, her blasts reflecting in a bright flare that scorches her retinas. But she keeps shooting, teeth bared, pushing him back a step at a time. Fool! Rack-Eye sneers, though the shield flickers with each impact. You can't break. Her final shot cracks the shield's energy field. The swirling barrier falters, leaving him exposed. She leaps forward with a guttural snarl, slamming the butt of her pistol into his jaw. He staggers, blood on his lip, snarling. In a desperate move, he grabs her wounded side, digging cruel fingers into the burn. She howls, momentarily paralyzed by agony. Kale, clutching his injured shoulder, forces himself to his feet. With a pained grunt, he barrels into Rakai from behind, sending the warlord sprawling. Sirenai collapses to her knees, breath ragged. The timer on the charges ticks ominously in her mind. She has seconds, maybe less. If they don't leave now, they're finished. Kale stands over the stunned Rakai, rifle aimed. Blood drips from his own wound, his face contorted with fury. "This is for all of them," he mutters, voice shaking. He pulls the trigger. The shot tears through Rakai's chest. The warlord's eyes widen, disbelief turning to emptiness as he slumps to the floor. For a moment, the only sound is the hiss of steam and crackle of fires. Sirenai stares at Rakai's fallen form, shock and grim satisfaction coursing through her. Then Kale staggers to her, pulling her up. She gasps at the pain, but wraps an arm around his waist, leaning on him for support as they limp toward the exit. She fumbles for the detonator, thumb hovering over the trigger. "No," Kale urges. She presses it. The charges beep in rapid succession, resonating in her eardrums like a death knell. The two of them break into a stumbling run, heading back toward the elevator. Walls quake, metal groans, and bursts of fire erupt behind them. She can hear the Starkiller's systems failing, reality itself warping under the force of the sabotage. Smoke fills her lungs, but she keeps going, fueled by sheer will, and by the steady presence of Kale at her side. They reach the elevator platform, which is trembling from the onslaught of explosions below. With frantic gestures, Kale hammers the control panel. The lift rises, rattling up the shaft. Debris rains down, choking dust swirling in the flickering lights. The roar of the explosions intensifies, and for one terrifying moment, the elevator stalls. Sirenai feels panic claw at her throat, but then the platform lurches back to life, inching upwards again. Finally, the doors above them open to the cavern. The elevator lurches to a stop, and they stumble out into swirling dust. The co-pilot and the rebel are there, shouting wordlessly. Kale and Sirenai collapse into their arms, hastily racing for the waiting shuttle. The ground shakes beneath them, the entire planetoid quaking as the Starkiller's meltdown escalates. They haul themselves up the ramp, and the co-pilot wastes no time lifting off. Engines roar, thrusters blazing as the shuttle speeds out of the cavern entrance. Behind them, the rock face splits, spewing molten debris. In the cockpit, alarms screech. Sirenai grips Kale's arm, ignoring the searing pain in her side. He winces at his shoulder wound, but remains focused, free hand braced against the bulkhead to steady himself. "Get us clear!" he yells over the din. The shuttle bursts from the planetoid's surface, weaving past boulders and streams of fiery ejecta. Sirenai's vision swims. She leans her head against Kale's shoulder, eyes fluttering, lungs burning from the smoky air. Yet she's alive, and so is he. Rakai is dead, the weapon destroyed. They did it. A final, earth-shattering explosion rocks the planetoid below. A plume of brilliant light engulfs the surface, sending chunks of rock hurtling into space. The shockwave catches the shuttle's hull, rattling it violently. The co-pilot curses, fighting the controls as they're nearly tossed end over end. But somehow, miraculously, they stabilize, engines roaring at maximum thrust. Then, in a moment of breathtaking clarity, the shuttle breaks free into open space, leaving the collapsing planetoid behind. The Starkiller's meltdown flares in the distance, a final eruption of cosmic fury, before the planetoid fractures and implodes in on itself. Kale and Sirenai watch through the viewport, battered and bloodied, but unbroken. Silence falls in the shuttle, punctuated only by labored breathing. The rebel pilot checks the scanners, no sign of immediate pursuit. The co-pilot slumps in relief. Sirenai tears her gaze from the destruction outside, turning to Kale. He's pale, bleeding, but a faint smile tugs at the corner of his mouth when their eyes meet. She releases a shaky laugh, though it sounds more like a sob. We actually did it. He nods, hand gently pressing against her wound, a silent offer of support. It's over. For a moment, they just stare at each other, words failing. The swirl of cosmic debris outside seems distant, inconsequential compared to the raw intensity pulsing between them. Serenai's heart clenches, realizing that she no longer has to chase revenge. Rakai is gone. And Kale, her eyes search his face. He's not the easy prey she once assumed. He's the partner she never expected, the one who stood by her when the galaxy threatened to crush them both. She nearly gives in to the urge to lean forward, to close the distance and taste the moment. But the co-pilot's voice interrupts, calling for medical supplies. Kale nods, snapping back to reality. Together, they help each other limp to the shuttle's tiny med bay, tending to their burns and bullet wounds as best they can. The pain is real, tangible, a reminder of what they survived. Hours later, the adrenaline fades, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion. Serenai lies on a makeshift cot, eyes half-lidded. Kale sits beside her, one arm in a sling. The overhead light casts harsh shadows across his face, etching the lines of weariness and relief. She watches him, her senses dulled by painkillers and lingering shock. Even through the haze, she feels the same tug of awareness whenever she's near him. He notices her stare, meeting her gaze with a hesitant flicker of concern. How bad does it hurt? She exhales a shaky chuckle. Which part? He nods, lips twisting in a wry half-smile. Fair enough. Silence drapes over them again, but it's not uncomfortable. It's the quiet of survivors who've come through fire and found themselves changed on the other side. She reaches out, her fingers brushing his uninjured arm. He stiffens slightly, then relaxes, allowing the contact. Thank you, she murmurs, voice rough. For not leaving me behind. He shrugs, eyes drifting. You could have left me too, when I got shot. But you didn't. He lifts his gaze, and there's a softness there she never expected. Guess we make a good team. She closes her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. Yeah, she whispers. We do. For the first time since she found herself in that detention cell, she feels something akin to peace. They may not have resolved every demon in their pasts, but they destroyed the man who wronged them both, along with his unholy weapon. They're free, in a sense, and bound to each other by the blood they've spilled and saved. She wonders what tomorrow will bring, but for now, she just wants to rest. Kale remains there, watchful, until her breathing evens out in fitful slumber. When he finally shifts to leave, he pauses, glancing back at her sleeping form. She looks vulnerable in this state, a far cry from the fierce huntress who nearly bested him in the cell. Something tugs at his chest, an unspoken certainty that she's become more than just an ally of convenience. They've risked everything together, and in doing so, they've forged a bond he can't easily define. Still, he doesn't wake her. Instead, he drags himself to the cockpit, where the co-pilot wordlessly cedes the pilot's seat, letting him check their course. They'll rendezvous with the rebels or find some safe harbor soon. But in his mind, he's already thinking beyond the next port, beyond the next mission. A new possibility stirs. Maybe, just maybe, he won't be fighting this war alone. And in the med bay, Serenai sleeps fitfully, dreams haunted by images of Rakai's sneer and the cosmic fires that consumed him. Yet, every time the nightmare threatens to swallow her, a shadowy figure appears in her mind, standing at her side. A tall, battle-scarred human with eyes like tempered steel. The memory of his hand supporting her, his unwavering presence in the thick of battle, threads through her dreams like a promise. They outrun death together. And though their scars are many, the galaxy now opens before them, limitless. As the shuttle drifts through the silent tapestry of stars, they begin to realize, whether they want to admit it or not, they've already become each other's reason to keep going. They spend the next day tending wounds and repairing the shuttle's battered systems. The co-pilot tries to raise a rebel outpost on the comms, but signals are patchy in this region. Serenai helps, her side bandaged but healing, using her alien senses to fine-tune the shuttle's sensors. Meanwhile, Kale busies himself with hull repairs, refusing to let his shoulder injury slow him down more than necessary. It's a subdued atmosphere. They've accomplished their goal. Rakai is dead, Project Eclipse destroyed. Yet the victory feels hollow without some sense of what comes next. Sirenai catches Kale watching her more than once, a contemplative look on his face. She avoids asking the question they both sense looming. Will they part ways now that their shared enemy is gone? That evening, or what passes for evening on a spaceship, Kale finishes realigning a hull plate and finds Sirenai in the cargo bay, gazing out the small viewport at a swirl of distant galaxies. She tenses when she senses him approach, then relaxes. They stand side by side in silence for a moment, the weight of 1,000 unspoken things pressing down. Finally, he breaks the silence. We'll reach a friendly port soon. You can do whatever you want after that. No one's holding you. She turns to him, a faint frown drawing her brows together. What if I'm not sure what I want? He exhales, rolling his shoulder to ease the discomfort of his sling. You said you wanted freedom? A bitter laugh escapes her. Yeah. But freedom without purpose is meaningless. She stares at the stars, voice quiet. I spent so long plotting revenge against Rakai. Now he's gone, and I don't know what to do with myself. He studies her profile, the iridescent sheen of her skin catching the faint starlight. You could join the rebels. Or find a new cause. She shakes her head. The rebels see me as a monster, a relic of Rakai's hunts. I don't belong there. She looks at him, eyes revealing a vulnerability she can't fully hide. What about you? Your vendetta's settled too, right? He nods slowly. Rakai was the last piece of a betrayal that started years ago. Now, I'm at loose ends. A wry smile lifts the corner of his mouth. Guess that makes two of us. Silence again, but this time it's charged with a different kind of tension, the soft hush of two people searching for answers in each other's presence. Sirenai lifts a hand, fingertips brushing his uninjured arm. She can sense his body heat spike slightly, a telltale sign even he can't control. He doesn't step away. Stay with me, she says, the words surprising even herself. Her voice trembles, just a little. We work well together. We could. He cuts her off, not unkindly. Become mercenaries? Outlaws? There's a trace of dark humor in his tone. She shrugs, a hint of a smile on her lips. Why not? The galaxy is full of ugly truths. We can do some good, maybe. Or at least survive together. She forces a laugh. Besides, you still owe me for dragging me around in cuffs. He laughs under his breath, the sound low and unexpectedly warm. Right. I suppose I do. They lock eyes. Something settles between them, an unspoken agreement that they're not ready to separate. She closes the distance, the memory of near-death experiences fueling her courage. He doesn't pull away. Their faces are close enough that she feels the whisper of his breath. Her heart thunders in her chest, and she wonders if his does too. His voice drops to a barely audible murmur. Are you sure? A million thoughts tumble through her mind. Doubt, fear, the memory of betrayal, the uncertainty of forging a bond with a human who was once her captor. But beneath all that, a fierce certainty burns. I'm done running alone, she says. I don't want to lose the only person who's matched me step for step. He exhales, almost a shudder. I never wanted to cage you, he admits, raw honesty lacing his words. But I couldn't risk letting you walk free. Now, it feels wrong to watch you walk away. She smiles, a genuine, soft curve of her lips. You'd have to catch me first, soldier boy. His eyes flick to her mouth, tension rolling off him in waves. He's as torn as she is, but the pull is undeniable. Slowly, almost tentatively, his hand rises to cup her cheek, his rough thumb brushing the edge of her jaw. A trembling breath escapes her. It's not gentle, not exactly, because there's too much intensity simmering beneath the surface. Still, it's more vulnerability than either of them has shown before. She tilts her face upward, and the universe seems to hold its breath. Their lips meet in a sudden, heated clash, a continuation of the battle they've been waging since the day they met. It's not gentle or soft, it's a desperate meld of shared relief and pent-up desire. She gasps against his mouth, fingers curling into his shirt, drawing him closer. His sling shifts awkwardly, but he ignores the pain, deepening the kiss with a ferocity that mirrors every time they've risked death together. For a moment, the galaxy narrows to just this: the taste of him, the heat of his body, the thunder of her pulse. She's never felt so alive, so painfully aware of another being. It's not a surrender, nor is it a conquest. It's a meeting of equals, two forces that have warred and survived and now collide in a rush of sensation. Eventually, they break apart, breath ragged. She rests her forehead against his, eyes closed, savoring the thrum of energy pulsing between them. Neither speaks. There's no need. The decision is made. Whatever the future holds, warring factions, old scars, new enemies, they'll face it together. He recovers first, stepping back slightly to steady himself. We'll need a real ship, he jokes, voice rough with emotion. Something better than this hunk of junk. She laughs, the sound light and unguarded, surprising even herself. Deal. They share a brief, knowing look before returning to the cockpit. The co-pilot notices something different about them. The tension in the air has shifted, replaced by an undercurrent of unity. He doesn't comment. He just nods, as if relieved they've found some resolution. Over the next few days, they navigate to a small station on the outskirts of a neutral trade hub. The station's a ramshackle place, filled with smugglers and displaced ex-rebels. Kale and Sirenai secure repairs and discreetly register for supplies, using what credits they can scrounge. When the co-pilot and the surviving rebel decide to rejoin their faction, Kale and Sirenai watch them depart, exchanging subdued farewells. Then it's just the two of them, leaning against a railing in the station's crowded docking bay, watching ships come and go. Sirenai glances at Kale, a ghost of a smile tugging her lips. He looks different, still scarred and intense, but there's a lightness in his eyes she hasn't seen before. Maybe it mirrors her own newfound sense of possibility. You're sure about this? She asks, though she already knows the answer. He slips an arm around her waist, careful of her still healing wound. I am. We have a score to settle with the galaxy. She hums in agreement. Plenty of warlords left. Plenty of people who need a pair of ruthless killers on their side. He smirks. We can charge a premium. She leans her head against his shoulder, the closeness feeling both strange and perfectly natural. The noise of the station washes around them, but in that moment, it feels like they're in their own world. She closes her eyes, recalling the blast of heat from the Starkiller, the swirl of cosmic dust when they fled, and the look in Kale's eyes when he aimed his rifle at Rakai. She never wants to forget those moments, because they led her here, to someone who fights like she does and maybe loves like she does too. Let's find a better ship, she whispers, echoing his earlier jest. And then let's see how much trouble we can stir up. He chuckles, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. I'm counting on it. They turn toward the row of parked vessels, searching for one that might suit their needs, a small, agile craft with enough firepower to keep them alive. The future looms, vast and unpredictable. But for once, they don't face it alone. She once thought he'd be easy prey. Now she's the one clinging to his side, unwilling to let go. A spark of shared defiance flickers between them, a promise that no matter what threats arise, they will meet them head-on, shoulder to shoulder. They walk off together, the noise of the station swallowing their footsteps, two kindred predators bound by battle and sealed by a raw, unmistakable bond. In the endless expanse of stars, they have each other, and for now, that's more than enough.